I call on Deputy O'Keefe.
Taoiseach, the intergovernmental treaty that was finalised last Monday included a statement from the EU Council on Growth, Consolidation and Job Creation. And the Council concluded that much more needed to be done to deal with the crisis, and particularly the jobs crisis. And the Europe 2020 strategy was mentioned in each member state is to set out its national jobs plan. We have yet to see the national jobs plan, even though the government have announced, according to ISME, it's pending publication 9 times. Now, I think you have to set this against the promise of 100,000 jobs at the time of the election, coming from New Era, and also the famous jobs fund that was to be set up in a strategic investment bank. We know we have a major problem in this country with youth unemployment and, if I might also say, with youth migration. And what I would like to ask is 3 specific questions. Is the government going to set up a national youth employment fund similar to that in the UK and other EU countries? I'd also like to ask you, when is the government going to publish its plans on how to address unemployment in Ireland? And the third question is, has it agreed to utilise the European Stability Fund to support more apprenticeship programmes for young business starters?
Thank you, Deputy.
Well, as Deputy O'Keefe says, the jobs issue was part of the agreement which was reached last Monday at the European meeting of heads of state and government. There was a specific agreement that the economic situation in Europe is not an economic situation that can be resolved alone by budgetary and by fiscal measures, that there needs to be a jobs and growth strategy, and that is something that the Irish government was very keen to have on the agenda and to have it continued. In addition to what was agreed last Monday in respect of measures relating to youth unemployment, in relation to small and medium-sized businesses, and in relation to the completion of the single market, it was also agreed that the jobs and growth agenda would remain on the agendas for European summits into the future. In relation to the measures that are being taken by the Irish government, as you know, we intend to publish a jobs action plan. The draft of that plan was considered by the government this week, and we expect that it will be published in the very near future, within a matter of weeks. Complementing that plan, there is also the labour activation measures, for which Minister Joan Burton has responsibility, and she will shortly be publishing the Pathways to Work proposals and initiatives which are being taken by the government, which will set out in detail the measures that government is taking to ensure that training, education, job experience, internships and so on are provided for people who are out of work. In addition to that, we are also pursuing an investment strategy. Next week, the Taoiseach and I will attend in New York at the meeting, the event which is being convened by President Clinton. As you know, when the Global Irish Economic Forum took place in October, President Clinton attended that and committed to convene an investment meeting, mainly of people who wouldn't normally have associations with Ireland. That meeting is due to take place in New York next week and will be attended by both the Taoiseach and myself. In addition to that, we will have coming up very soon a visit from the Vice President of China, with whom we have been discussing the possibilities for expansion of trade and investment, all of which is aimed at the generation of employment. The approach that we will take to the issue of youth unemployment will be contained in the Pathways to Work initiative, which is being launched by Minister Burton. As I said, the issue of the Jobs Action Plan that's been considered by government will be published shortly, and in respect of the funding for small and medium-sized enterprises, as you know, that was part of the agreement that was reached last Monday, and we will continue to ensure that all of the instruments which are available to the European Union to extend funding for small and medium-sized businesses are used to the full by this country.
Thank you. Deputy O'Keefe.
Taoiseach, it's very appropriate, I think, that you raised the issue about funding for small and medium-sized enterprises, because, as you know, financial stability and financial certainty is vital for business. And something has arisen in relation to Galway Airport that has huge, wide implications for businesses right across the country. Last Thursday, they had €1.6 million in a bank account.
Deputy, what's the supplementary question to your original question?
Yes, that's right. It's about investment of money. No, I will explain what happened, and if you think it's a laughing matter, I think it's not. They had 1.6 million in the bank. They had all of their loans up to date. They were fully within the terms of the loans. They had all the interest paid up to date. And the bank, without notice, transferred 1.1 million of that money to offset against the term loans. Now, if that is carried across in other businesses, it will have a huge effect. So now if somebody puts money into their bank account, they can't be sure that that money won't be immediately offset against term loans which are up to date, where all the interest is paid. And what I want to know from you is, since this was one of the covered banks, one of the banks that we have put billions into to ensure that business can trade, what I want to know is, what is the government going to do to ensure, one, that this issue is dealt with, and two, that the covered institutions are told in no uncertain terms by the government that this practice is not acceptable and that business has to be able to function in a normal way and that the normal rules of business must apply. And I want a specific, clear answer as to what you're going to do to deal with this issue and to ensure that this isn't the first of many cases that this absolutely outrageous practice is carried out by the banks.
Well, Deputy O'Keefe's initial question was to ask me to answer three specific questions in relation to the measures that the government is taking to deal with the jobs crisis, and I'm delighted that he was clearly so satisfied with the specific answers that I provided to him to those three specific questions that he has now changed entirely the question that he is asking me by way of supplementary. I have read the report of what happened in relation to Galway Airport, which is a privately owned airport and which obviously has its own relationship with the bank. It wouldn't be appropriate, I think, for government to intervene in the case of an individual relationship between, an individual account holder with the bank. But by way of general practice, the government has set down targets for the banks to lend to small and medium-sized businesses. Specific targets have been set down in respect of that, and the government has spoken directly with the banks about how they are meeting those targets, and we intend to be speaking directly with the banks again in the near future in relation to that. In respect of difficulties which are arising as to how that operates in practice, there is, as Deputy O'Keefe knows, a credit review office within the Department of Finance which has a particular responsibility for liaising with the banking systems and with individual banks, and which can deal with the kind of general policy issues that Deputy O'Keefe has raised. And I expect that policy approach and change of policy, if there is a change of policy in relation to what the banks are doing, can be pursued through the Credit Review Office.
Thank you.
Are you willing to make sure that a statement goes out today saying
Deputy
that
MacDonald. Deputy MacDonald, please. Deputy, would you please sit down? Deputy. Deputy MacDonald. Would you please cease ignoring the chair, Deputy? Thank you. Deputy MacDonald, thank you.
Taoiseach, I want to raise with you the matter of the exceptional needs payments, which I understand Minister Joan Burton, in her continuing crusade against families on low incomes, is proposing to cut. The exceptional needs payment is, by definition, a payment made to families in exceptional need, and last year nearly 250,000 such payments were paid out under this scheme. Now, right throughout your programme of austerity and your budget cuts, Minister Burton reassured people that should they find themselves in dire need, that they could always go to their community welfare officer. But now it seems that you're intent on cutting even this safety net. So I want to ask you, Taoiseach, is it the case that the Minister plans to take €8.5 million from some of the poorest families in the state? And can I ask you, where do you suggest that these families go? Do you suggest that they simply go to the St Vincent de Paul? Is this now the approach and policy of government, slashing the basic entitlements of people on low incomes, removing safety nets, washing your hands of responsibility and relying on organisations like the St Vincent de Paul to pick up the pieces?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Under the Supplementary Welfare Allowance Scheme, the Department of Social Protection may make single payments to help meet essential once-off exceptional expenditure which a person could not reasonably be expected to meet out of their weekly income. The Department of Social Protection spent approximately €63 million in these payments last year and made payments to 226 individual claimants. The budget 2012 requires savings of €8.5 million in this area. Now, the exceptional needs payments has been in operation for some time, and there have been guidelines governing the way in which the exceptional needs payments are applied. Those guidelines have not been reviewed since 1995, and Minister Burton is changing those guidelines to reflect the current realities. Among the changes that she is making is looking at the way in which the exceptional needs payments are applied in different parts of the country. Some parts of the country you can get an exceptional needs payment for one type of applicant. In another part of the country it doesn't apply. One area, for example, and I saw it highlighted in some of the newspapers today, relates to the payments which are made for communion and confirmation. There have been last year there were 14,000 such payments made for communion and confirmation purposes, amounting to a total of 3.4 million. It is the view of the Minister, and something I share, that we have seen, I think, over the years, a lot of very lavish expenditure in some cases associated with communions and confirmations. And I know that many parishes and many schools are anxious to try and get the kind of costs that are associated with these events somewhat under control. As a result of that, she has decided, as part of the changes that she's making to the guidelines, to limit those payments in future to €110 in each case. And hopefully that will help to limit the amount of expenditure in areas like that. I should add that there are, as I said, parts of the country, for example, where the application of these payments varies. In Sligo, Leitrim and Donegal, for example, there were only 25 payments made last year in respect of communions and confirmations.
Thank you. Deputy MacDonald.
Well, Taoiseach, so you say that you put it in terms of changing the guidelines. What you're doing is introducing a cutback. And I think it's worth saying very clearly that it's not just individuals and families on social welfare who avail of these payments. Increasingly, it's the working poor. It's families who find it harder and harder to keep the ship afloat. Whatever your view of communion or confirmation, or indeed any other religious milestone in any citizen's life, a child has to be dressed for that occasion. And you reference those particular payments, but the vast bulk of the exceptional payments relate to a cooker that is needed, a washing machine, very often an energy bill that cannot be paid. And I think it's astonishing the contrast between the expenses that the members of this Dáil claim, 6 million in expenses, some of it unvouched, on the one hand, and then a government who proposes to take 8.5 million out of the pockets and off the backs of poor people. So can I take it from you, Tánaiste, that the crusade of this government, but more astonishing, the Labour Party against people on low incomes, is actually gathering pace? I want you to reverse that decision. I want you to tell this House that you will not continue to punish individuals and families who are only barely hanging on. And I would like you to do that, and I would suggest to you, Tánaiste, that the people who put you sitting in that seat opposite me expect you to do likewise.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, can I repeat again for Deputy MacDonald what this government has done for people who are on low incomes? In this year's budget, there was no cut in the basic rates of social welfare for the first time in a number of years. Number one. Number two, 330,000 people were taken out of the universal social charge. 330,000 people who are on the lowest. No, please listen.
Sorry, Deputy.
Please listen.
Deputy, you're the very one that asked for silence yourself, so please let him reply. Thank you.
I listened attentively to your question. All I ask is that you listen to the reply.
Yes, thank you. Please proceed. Thank you. There's a time limit on this of 1 minute.
330,000 people on the lowest incomes were taken out of the universal social charge. The cut that was made by the previous government on the national minimum wage was reversed by this government, something that you said that we wouldn't do. Now, what is happening here is we are dealing with special needs payments. These are the once-off payments that are made by community welfare officers. The rules governing those payments, the instructions, the guidelines that are given to the community welfare officers in their offices haven't been changed since 1995. Now, Deputy MacDonald, even you will acknowledge that a lot has changed since 1995. There are people at the moment who may be in need of special needs payments for one reason or another, but can't get them because the community welfare officers are operating on the basis of rules that are 17 years old. There are other cases where there are payments being made in some parts of the country where, yes, it might be more appropriate to use that money for where there is a greater level of need. This is about... No, please. No, don't be constantly saying cutbacks. This is about using the scarce resources of the public to the best effect, to ensure that the money that we spend for people who are in need goes to those who have the greatest need for it. And from time to time, it is necessary to change the way in which those monies are spent to ensure that they go to those who are in the greatest need. And I don't think that anybody can argue with the fact that rules that are 17 years old are in need of being updated in the times that we are now living in, so that those who are in the greatest need get the benefit from the exceptional needs payments.
Thank you. Deputy McGrath.
Thank you, Concora. Tánaiste, today I'd like to raise the very serious major issue concerning the Justice for the Forgotten group, which represents the families and victims of the Dublin, Monaghan, Belturbet, Dundalk, Casablanca bombings, and also the families of the Miami Chauvin massacre. And I think this is something, hopefully, you can do something about. All members of this House support the valuable work and compassionate work of this organisation. And in the past, as you know, Tánaiste, successive governments have supported Justice for the Forgotten, and that's the way it should be. So today, Tánaiste, I would like to ask you, first of all, to seriously continue all this work with all the victims and their families, and of course when I mention Justice for the Forgotten Group, I'm also including all the victims of the conflict, and especially those who seek support. Secondly, Taoiseach, can I ask you specifically in relation to Justice for the Forgotten Group, has your government raised the issue of the Miami Shoban massacre or the Dublin Monaghan bombings at any recent meetings with Mr Cameron and the British government? Did they get the message that the Dáil has major concerns about the lack of cooperation on this issue? Did you ask them to release the documents they withheld from the Barron inquiries? And if you did, how did they respond? Did you inform them that the Dáil still has major concerns about the collusion issue? And finally, Taoiseach, there is a major financial crisis at the Dublin office of Justice for the Forgotten, and they urgently need €17,000 to keep their Dublin office open. Now, it's not a lot of money in the bigger picture in this House, but it is to the families and the victims. So, Taoiseach, can I ask you and the government, could you come up with some new radical proposal in order to assist them with the €17,000? Thank you, Concordia.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, as the Deputy is aware, this House unanimously passed a motion here in relation to the Dublin Monaghan bombings, and the terms of that motion were conveyed to the British Parliament and to the British government. I have met with the Justice for the Forgotten group. We have raised on several occasions with the British government the motion that was passed unanimously here in this House and the terms of it, one of which was a call for the release of all of the documents that relate to the bombing. As you know, the British government has not agreed to release some of those documents, but we've continued to press the case directly with them. The Taoiseach has raised the issue directly with Prime Minister Cameron. I have raised it with Secretary of State Patterson, whose responsibility for Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and also with Foreign Secretary William Hague, and with the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Nick Clegg. It is something that we continue to do on an ongoing basis. In addition to the issues, the Dublin Monaghan bombings and the Miami Shoban killings, we have also been pursuing the issue relating to the killing of Solicitor Pat Finucane. I've been in touch with the Finucane family about that, and indeed have also discussed with the British government the wider issue of the many atrocities which occurred and the grief which many families still feel in relation to it. And I want to assure you that we will continue to have that discussion with the British ministers and with the British government about it, with the view to arriving at a framework or a resolution which will give closure to the families who are concerned. I will look at the issue that you raised about the funding for the Dublin office. I'm not briefed on that specifically this morning, but I will have a look at what you have said about that.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
First of all, I want to thank the Taoiseach for his response, and I hope he can continue on to help the families. And I do appreciate the fact that they have met the families and they are pushing the issue. But I'd like to ask the fundamental question is, why does the Taoiseach think that they do not want to release these documents, particularly in light of the developments, we'll say, when David Cameron apologised for Bloody Sunday and the fantastic reaction on the island of Ireland to that statement? So a lot of people are very concerned, have suspicions about it. But just to go back to the issue about the 17,000, if I may, Concordia, can I ask him, the Taoiseach, if he's aware that one of the reasons why they're short of the funding is because Justice for the Forgotten are outside the geographical remit of the Special European EU Programmes body, and Dublin, because of its geographical location, is excluded. So what I'm asking the Taoiseach to hear, we're pointing a direction. The families have asked me to ask you that if you could resolve this technical problem, as there should never be a hierarchy of victims because of where they're located. So can I ask you, when you're looking into the whole issue of the 17,000 for this group, you could also examine and look very closely, and I know things are tight in the budgetary sense, but I'd also look at examples of waste of taxpayers' money at the moment, where I've seen 145,000 being spent on storing e-voting machines, and I saw the state recently pay out 500,000 to rent empty offices for for the OPW, and I'm looking for, they're looking for 17,000. So finally, Taoiseach, can I ask you and urge you to support Justice for the Forgotten and try and find the €17,000 to support their Dublin office and the families? And they have suffered enough injustice, and let's do something about this issue. It's a small issue financially, but it's a big thing for the families.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, I mean, this is the first time that Deputy McGrath has raised the issue of the 17,000 with me, and he'd appreciate I can't give a, without briefing myself on the entire issue and the financial situation, give you a commitment across the floor of the House on it, other than to say that yes, I will look at it. As you're aware, my department does provide funding for reconciliation purposes and for support for the victims of the conflict, and I would hope to be able to continue that funding through this year. There is a system whereby different groups and organisations make applications for such funding, and I will look at the issue that you've raised and the money in that context. And again, to say that I'm hugely conscious of the grief, the sorrow, the loss, the continuing sense of aggrievement that the families of victims of the Northern Ireland years of trouble are experiencing, and that applies irrespective of whether those families are in Dublin, Belfast, Sion Mills or anywhere else. There's been a huge amount of grief, a huge amount of hurt, and it is an issue which is very much on the agenda in the discussions that I have directly with Secretary of State Patterson and that we have on a bilateral basis between the Irish and British governments. It is an issue that we're hugely conscious that has to be dealt with sensitively, appropriately. There are areas where we disagree about what needs to be done, and one of the areas, for example, in respect of the Dublin Monaghan bombings, has been the continuing refusal of the British government to make the material available which was sought by the Dáil.
Thank you, Tom.